Welcome to Learning to Listen class, step 6. We are on the last fruit of the Spirit listed, self-control. We covered it last time. We're just going to review a little bit that God does want us to exercise self-control. And best practice is to do that by offering Him control. We take our authority of our control and give it to Him, which is exercising self-control. And then when He gives us actions or inactions to take, thoughts, then following those is exercising self-control. When you've had a really hard moment and you want to just binge watch your favorite show and eat a bunch of ice cream, then you realize that's just for your comfort, but what your soul actually needs is to meet with the Lord. And you go on a prayer walk with Him, you talk to Him, you get His guidance, and take the actions He asked you to take, which might be having a prayer session with your partner, having prayerful conversation and special prayer with your children, bringing other people into the conversation and praying with them, and maybe still having a sweet moment together, but exercising the self-control in Him. We also did testimonies. There was a testimony by one of the class members who'd previously mentioned that they were informed they were going to be losing their job. He had several layers of praise report. Number one is God has been so good, and His choices to exercise His self-control in giving God control, that He's had peace and patience throughout the process, and he praises God for that. His other praise report was that the employer is now going to allow an extra month of employment to get through the holiday season, and also that would give severance pay further out. He was thrilled to report in God's provisions for his family monetarily, but most spiritually. We talked about being able to do all things through Christ who gives us strength, as promised in Philippians 4:13, and as evident by Christ Himself. When He gave all authority to His Father while He walked on this earth, He was able to walk the perfect life God asks us to, giving us an example of what is possible when we put God in the position of authority for our thoughts and choices. And to remember it's possible, we studied Enoch, who walked with God and God took him away. And to remember, yes, we should aim high. Our goal should be this close to God, to always be this close to God, to grow and grow and grow, and just to walk with Him to heaven. But there shouldn't be any getting upset at ourselves if we can't, or if we don't. Because the truth is, God knows we all struggle. This is possible. But even Paul, before he was martyred, about how he still struggled against the flesh. He still had problems. And yet, he had good fruit, and he was with the Lord, despite his struggles. We talked about fruit and testing prophets and messages. When you receive a message or someone claims to be a prophet for the Lord, we are expected to test that message and the prophet with fruit. As one of the class members pointed out, that doesn't mean there's no bad fruit. And when we were trying to understand that and wrestling through it as a class, God brought up to one of the class members that if you have a good fruit tree bearing plentiful, beautiful fruit, there is still bad fruit on that good fruit tree. Just like each of us bearing good fruit for the Lord, working for Him, still has pieces of bad fruit here and there that God's working in our gardens to clean up the fruit tree. The same is true with our lives and others. When you see prophets or messages that are from the Lord, it should align with the good fruit. Don't throw out the entire messenger because they still struggle to have a bad fruit here or there. Then a classmate brought up something very interesting. They brought up the story of Jesus cursing the fig tree. In Mark 11:12 through 25, there's a story of Jesus cursing a fig tree. It's always confused me, but God gave light today to our class through one of the class members. It says, as they were leaving Bethany, Jesus was hungry. Seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to find out if it had any fruit. When he reached it, he found nothing but leaves, because it was not the season for figs. Then he said to the tree, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples heard him say it. On reaching Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple and began driving out those who were buying and selling there. It was actually quite a thing. We're going to go on past that and say, when evening came, in verse 19, Jesus and his disciples went out of the city. Verse 20, in the morning, as they went along, they saw the fig tree withered from the roots. Peter remembered and said to Jesus, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree you cursed is withered." This classmate said that they struggled with this story and kind of tabled it in the back and didn't do much with it, but that God revealed to them part of the meaning of this as an analogy. There are people walking around with beautiful leaves, beautiful displays that bear no fruit. In their heart, there is not love for others. It is all a show. That is what is cursed. We are not to fancy ourselves up and look holy while being void on the inside. We are to have God's Spirit on the inside, bearing good fruit within us. It's not about the show. It's about the Lord, and the Lord will produce fruit. Now we're on to discernment level 3. This is the highest level of discernment because the Bible is God's holy word and it is absolutely reliable. We'll review why. The Bible is the standard of truth to measure any message you or anyone ever receives. This is because of the background knowledge we covered in Class 1. As a refresher, those 2 points are this. The Bible is God's inspired word and a source of truth for God's principles and values. God's principles and values do not change. God is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. That means that if the message does not match the truths found in the Bible, we can know for a fact that the source is not God. If the Bible is our source of knowledge, of knowing God and His truth, then learning how to search the Bible to answer our questions is essential. We're going to talk about 2 key elements at first of good Bible searching: scope and context. Scope is to get the whole picture, not just the part you want to look at. Read every verse that relates to your topic. It has never been easier than now to search for a topic or a question and get every verse that relates to it. We'll talk about how to do that later, but right now we're just talking about don't leave things out. If you're going to read something and you're reading through verses and you don't understand some of them, you don't skip them. If you don't like what they have to say, you don't skip them. You read them. So don't skip anything. The first part to a good Bible study without inserting our own biases is to make sure that we're reading all the verses that relate to our topic so that we aren't skipping anything. That avoids inserting bias. The next is context. Not only do you want to read all of the verses and not skip any that relate to your question or topic, but you want to read them in context. When you find verses that are applicable, confusing, or even the opposite of what you want, or what you've heard, or your expectation, the action to take is to read that section. Most Bibles nowadays have section headings, so you know when a story starts and when a story stops. What do you do when you find applicable verses to your question or your study? You read them. What about confusing verses? Do we skip them? No, that's scope. You read those too. What about opposite verses? We also read those. The only verses we don't have to read in our study are verses that don't apply. And what is the action to take when you find these verses, applying verses, confusing verses, or opposite verses? Read the whole section. Figure out who, what, why, when, and where. Get the big picture so you can see God's heart on the issue. What is his character doing? What is it revealing? There is much to learn from contradictions to get the big picture in the Bible, because God doesn't contradict himself. There is a big picture. What is God's character telling us? It's okay if your study leads to deeper questions. Remember, God is the author of the Bible. There is no limit to the depth of his character. And when we study the Bible, we're trying to study to learn who God is and what his character is. It will get deep, and that's okay. There's nothing to fear. We can have faith that God will guide us in reading his word and searching for his truth and his character. We want to meet him there, love him, and get deeper into a relationship with him. We want to know what God is telling us, not just pick verses that feel good or support our points. So when we study the Bible, our goal should always be to know God, to understand his character, to know what God is telling us, not to pick verses that feel good or support our points. So scope and context. Scope is not leaving the verses out. Read everything that relates to your question or study. And context is read the sections around those verses so that you know what they were talking about and you're not taking them out of context and misquoting them, accidentally or intentionally. We want to know why that was being said. Read the verses in context. Read that whole section and know the character of God as it's being revealed in that section. We stopped here and we overviewed a little bit. We're going to go over different types of searches we can use to find where verses about our questions or Bible studies are. We can use topical indexes, commentaries, concordances, keywords, or original language. I'm sure there's others. If we find a good one, we'll add it to the list. But we'll start with this list, and starting with next class, the class members and I will bring some of these resources so that we can compare the types of questions that get answered when you use those types of resources. We will use each resource. We will bring examples of each of these and use them to look up the same story or idea or question. And then we will see how each of these can be used, the strengths and the weaknesses, to help us find God's character in our Bible studies and the truth he has to teach us. I look forward to seeing you guys next time, and I pray that God will continue revealing himself to you and teaching you the difference between his spirit, and that you will always draw close to him.